A couple of months ago, when I was writing the book Why 70% of Black Women Are Single, a family member and I, we were sitting at the table, and she made the point that, what is the purpose of a man? And what does a man do as it relates to the family? And I was so inspired by what she presented, the concept that she presented to me, that I actually added it in as a chapter in the book Why 70% of Black Women Are Single. And in this video, I'm going to go into why this whole concept of a man is completely dysfunctional, and it relates to the total decline of the black community and the total decline of the black family. Now, in the 1960s and the late 1960s, 1970s, a lot of black women and other American women who were a part of the feminist movement did not want to get married, and they didn't want to follow these so-called traditional titles. So they came up with, and a lot, especially for black women, what they did was, because they were joining the welfare state, and the welfare state came up with this concept, saying that this father couldn't be in the home, they had more incentive to not get married, and what they would do was they would have a series of boyfriends. And some women would call this boyfriend the uncle, others would call him the friend, and many just called him a man. What does a man do? We have absolutely no idea. This man became a social construct over the years as this welfare state continued to progress from the 70s to the 80s, all the way into the 90s. And this role, as it was socially engineered over those two generations, and it is still engineered to this day, evolved into this concept. And a lot of girls grew up with this idea, and again, it became a social construct in families and societies. And the whole idea of a man is something that a woman has in her home, because these liberal policies in this welfare state created this rule that said the father couldn't be in the home. So women went and got their Section 8, their projects, and went to go live in the projects, and they would have a series of boyfriends, and this guy eventually evolved into this man. And this man concept is one of the most dysfunctional social constructs to ever come out of the Great Society in the late 1960s and the early 70s, because the concept of a man, totally flies in the face of everything God created men to be. When we look at the role of men, God made the man to be, one, the head of the family, two, his physical and spiritual leader. And when we look at this social construct of a man in the black community, this concept of a man is based on a man being submissive. The man is not the head of the household. The man is not the head of the family. The man has no control over what goes on in his family or in his home. This man has no sense of responsibility. This man has no sense of authority. And this man feels no sense of responsibility. And how does that relate to the dysfunction in the black community? This man was the model for manhood in the black community for the last 30, 40 years. And as this social construct evolved, women stopped looking for husbands and they started looking for a man. And this phrase became so much a part of the lexicon that is, most women nowadays don't think about saying, I want a husband. They say, I want a man. And again, when you start saying you want a man, you have already brought into a dysfunctional ideology, because again, a man has no defined role as relates to God. What a man has is a submissive role under a woman, because again, when in this welfare state, when this role was created, the man lived with the woman. The woman was the head of the household. The woman was the head of the family. The woman controlled the lease on the Section 8 housing or the projects. The woman controlled most of the income. And this guy just stayed there. He drifted in and out. He may have had a place back in the late 70s and the early 80s, but he didn't have a defined place. He didn't have a defined commit. He had no sense of commitment, no sense of responsibility, no sense of authority, and he had no sense of ownership in his community. What this man did was he went from woman to woman, place to place, bearing illegitimate children and creating dysfunction, chaos, and havoc. And this is where the seeds of the bitter harvest really begin, because when you look at this role of a man, it really shows, that this male has no defined position in his own community. And this is why I say this concept, social construct known as a man, is very dysfunctional and has done pretty much a lot of damage in your black community. Because when you have this idea of a man in your mind and your daughter has this idea, I'm going to get me a man, it shows you that how deeply ingrained these dysfunctional ideas are. Because again, God made husbands and wives. He made men and women to become husbands and wives. He made men and women to form a family unit where everything comes together. He did not make the idea of a woman getting a man. A man, again, is a man-made social construct designed so that cowardly and irresponsible males and females can not be a part of a matrimonial relationship. What this idea of a man is just a way so people can say that, what, if I can want to leave, I can leave. If I want to not commit to this woman, I can not commit to this woman. I don't have to go to court to go file a divorce. I don't have to be embarrassed. I can just leave. And what happened is we wound up with situations which were twice as dysfunctional. Why? Because in a situation which many of these women and the man live together, what happens is that all these assets get commingled, all this property gets commingled, these children form an emotional attachment to this man. And what happens is when you try to separate things, they get extremely dysfunctional, more dysfunctional than a divorce. Because even in a divorce, the judge makes his decree, he separates the assets, he establishes a standard for visitation, and there's a set of rules and structure that both parties have to follow. But in a man situation, everything is a complete disaster because, again, you have financial assets that are commingled, you have personal assets that are commingled, you have emotional ties that children have that, are hard to sever and sometimes wind up severed and create devastating damage. And all these issues become exacerbated because this man situation and this man-made social construct of a man. And sadly, a lot of what happened with a lot of these mans in the community is that eventually the role of this man in the community, the guy who just lived in women's houses and went from place to place, is that this created with the second generation, which is my generation, the second social construct of the baby daddy. And this is what happened is, again, these sons learned from their mothers and their fathers how to have social relationships. And what happened was these sons learned the same irresponsible behaviors from both their mothers and their fathers, in that, you don't get married and get your own place and create your own family. You know what? You just go, you son, do what your father did. Drift from place to place, go from woman's house to woman's house. You wind up having kids with different women. And what happens is, instead of you being a father, you become a baby daddy. And because this is what his father was, and this is what he learned from his father and his mother, this is the culture that was taught to him, is that, no, you don't get married and create your own family, as stated in the Bible, which clearly states that, when a man and a woman marry, they two become one and they start to cleave to each other and they create their own household. What happens is, in this whole man situation, the woman gets a man, he stays in the place, he gets to watch TV, he gets to sit around the house all day. Occasionally, because he has no sense of obligation or responsibility, because this white liberals' government policies are paying for everything, he has no sense of responsibility, he has no sense of duty, and because he's there, and in a lot of cases, these kids aren't his, or if he does have kids, he feels no sense of responsibility, he feels no sense of authority, he feels no sense of obligation to taking care of anything, because he has no ownership of anything, because again, everything is in the woman's name, and she is the head of the household and the head of the family. So again, he feels no sense of responsibility or duty because again, he is just a man. And if he disagrees with this woman, she can call the police on him or whatever, or he can just walk out, or he can just, or if he just decides he just wants to walk out because again, he has no sense of responsibility. So what this man does is again, he has no commitment to anything. And what happens is, what does his son learn? What does his daughter learn? They learn, again, not to be a husband and a wife to each other and not to have a healthy relationship with other men and women. They learn the dysfunctional ideology of having a man. And a man relationship where a man and a girlfriend, again, it's very non, it's what cowards do because they're not committed enough to come together in a marriage relationship. They don't want to build a family. They don't want to build a relationship. And this really, as it has progressed over the last 30, 40 years, has led to the total decline. One of the reasons why the black community is in complete decline because, again, without a family unit to teach values to children, those children never learn to value not only their community, but themselves as well. And this is what happens when you have this concept of a man. And we really need to take a look at that concept because this is what a lot of cowardly, non-committal people did in the late 60s and early 70s, because even white people have done this. They talk about, I have a man, instead of I have a husband or I have a boyfriend, because these are defined roles in the family. You know, eventually in a courtship relationship, what happens is you go from, the guy you were introduced, the guy you were dating, and then he becomes your boyfriend, and eventually he becomes, when he proposes marriage, he becomes your fiance, and then after you become married, he becomes your husband. In a man situation, he remains the same no matter what. And when you have a man, he has no defined role. He's just there, and he can come and he can go, and it can go on for years and years and years and years and years. And what can happen is you can have children with this man, you can have a household with this man, and at any time in his life, he can just get up and leave, and everything just winds up a complete mess. It's totally different from a divorce because in a divorce, you at least everything's defined. You know there's a period at the end of the story, and everything is over. But in a man situation, it just goes on for almost forever. And that's what happens in many of these man situations is that it eventually becomes a codependent relationship where the woman tries to hold on to this man instead of saying, you know what, it's over. They try to hold on to him through his kids. They try to keep going back and forth with him in child support court, and they try to keep making things, try to fit. And this is what leads to dysfunction. This is one of the reasons why your black family is falling completely apart. Is because an entire 2 generations and going on 3 have this whole idea of getting a man instead of having a family and having a husband. We really need to get back to the whole social construct of husbands and wives because this is how you have a functional family. This is the family that God created and established from the beginning. And he wants men and women to be husbands and wives, not a man. Because a man, nobody knows what that is. That's a man-made social construct. And it serves absolutely no purpose. I mean, if you look at it, this guy, again, is one of the reasons why your black community is complete dysfunction and complete chaos. And even parts of the white community are in complete dysfunction and chaos because the man eventually becomes the baby daddy, and the baby daddy is the one who winds up never being a model for manhood in his community. He has no sense of authority in his community. He is not a leader in his community. He has no sense of connection to his community. He has no sense of caring about his community. And all he does is he drifts from place to place looking for a woman to stay under. He is a completely weak and submissive male who just does whatever a woman wants, and he never comes to the point where he takes responsibility for himself and takes responsibility for any of the decisions he makes. If everything just gets messed up in the case of a man situation, this guy just gets up and leaves. And if he disagrees with a woman, he just gets up and leaves. He has no sense of commitment. He has no sense of dedication. And when you deal with this man in a man situation, nothing ever gets done because, again, he has no defined role. And the reason why he doesn't have a defined role is because both the man and the woman in these cases is too afraid to define that role. They really just want to just fool around. They don't really want to build a family or anything. And then when they do try to bring these familial elements into it, the whole thing falls completely apart. And it leads to the next generation of kids growing up believing that in these dysfunctional ideologies. And this is where a lot of it comes from, this dysfunction in the black community. Because instead of kids understanding that they have a father, and the father is a husband, they think that this is a man, and this is the way they call their fathers. They call that's my mother's man, or this the woman goes, that's my man, and instead of saying that's my husband, that's a natural relationship. A natural relationship is saying this is my husband. It's a defined role, and this defines him and defines what he relates to the family and how he represents the family. And a lot of women today don't even know how the whole concept of husband has been socially engineered right out of them over the last 40 years, and how most women now are looking for a man and not a husband. Because you have to understand, a husband, again, is a defined role. It's a defined role by God, and it's a defined role in society. It denotes leadership, it denotes authority, it denotes responsibility, it denotes commitment, and it denotes saying something that this man is dedicated to doing what is in the best interest of not only himself but his own family. And while this concept, social construct known as a man, has no sense of commitment to anything, he doesn't care about anything, he just drifts through life. And this is the way many of our black sons have been raised. They have been raised not to become husbands, but to become a man. And when you raise your son to become a man, he never, ironically, becomes a man. Because again, in these many of these households, this boy who learns how to become a man, because this is the model that's presented not only to him by his single mother, but by the males around him, he learns that he never has any real commitment to anything in his community or the people in it. And this is why your community falls completely apart, because again, this guy does not feel that he has to, do what he has to do to make his community the best it can be. He doesn't feel that he has to get up and take care of business. This guy the son who grows up to become a man, a quote unquote man, learns how to submit to women, how to defer to women, how to live up under women, and how to get all of his needs met by a woman. This is a complete reversal of God's natural order and the way God made relationships to be. And it's something that really, if you really want to work on changing this black community, this whole social construct of a man really needs to be challenged, and more importantly, it really needs to be eradicated. Because this whole social construct of a man serves no purpose in building functional families and having healthy relationships between black men and black women. That's all I have to say for this video. You can learn more about this concept of a man in my ebook, Why 70% of Black Women Are Single. It is sold on Amazon.com, iTunes, and Smashwords. It's only $5.99, but the information in there will make you quite wealthy in understanding the dysfunction in the relationships between black men and black women. I really urge you to go get it. Again, that's all I have to say for this video. Comment, rate, and subscribe.